What social factors pressure us to conform? Social influence can be divided into attempts made by the majority, the larger group, and attempts made by the minority, the smaller group. In these first few slides, let's take a look at the process by which the majority tries to influence the minority group through social pressure and creating uncertainty. On the slide, there are 4 factors that contribute to the power that the majority exerts: group size, social norms, dissenting allies, and, interestingly, gender. The larger the size of the incorrect and unanimous majority, the more influential it is. A 5-person group is usually more impactful than a 2-person group. Only up to a point, though. Adding members after this point won't produce much of an increase in conformity. We call this the law of diminishing returns. A 15-person group is only slightly more influential than a 10-person group. In other words, the return on adding increasingly more people to a group diminishes with each new member. The majority has power because it shapes the social norms of the group. This is one of the reasons employers train employees, to at least make them aware of social norms and expectations. Awareness is an important step in the change process. However, one challenge is the tendency to misperceive what is normal. Social psychologists call this pluralistic ignorance. For example, if someone incorrectly assumes a lot of other people use drugs, they are more likely to also use drugs. If someone witnesses someone else littering in a parking lot, they are more likely to also litter. When there is a dissenting ally present, the power of the majority decreases. In Ash's study, conformity dropped by almost 80% when one of the Confederates agreed with the participant, when they weren't alone in disagreeing with the rest of the group who was wrong. Any dissent, regardless of whether it validates our opinion, can reduce the normative pressures to conform. One of the reasons why dissenting allies can reduce majority influence is because it's usually more difficult to stand alone for our convictions than it is to be part of even a tiny minority. Social psychologists have found some gender differences when it comes to majority influence. Conformity is more likely when comfort with a task is low. Thus, women tend to conform more on masculine items tasks, while men tend to conform more on feminine tasks. In addition, women tend to conform more than men in public settings, like work meetings, but these gender differences disappear in private settings. Now let's take a look at minority influence, the process by which the smaller subgroup, the dissenters, produce change within the majority group. It isn't easy to express an unpopular opinion or to persuade others to adopt a controversial idea. So, individual dissenters may be vilified for their beliefs, and it appears minority members are aware of this risk. Social psychologists have found evidence that minority members are hesitant to answer questions about their unpopular beliefs, what they call the minority slowness effect. In the 1960s and 70s, Moscovici suggested minority groups build power by focusing on their behavior and what they do, while majority groups build power with their numbers alone. He found that minority members are more influential when their argument is consistent yet open-minded, and when they see themselves as similar to the majority in relevant ways. He called this the consistent dissent strategy. Another researcher, Hollander, recommended the first conform, then dissent strategy. He said nonconformists must first conform to the majority to establish credibility. This involves building what are called idiosyncratic credits, interpersonal brownie points that a person earns by following group norms. The power they build creates a buffer, and their counter-arguments are more likely to be tolerated by the majority. One by one, then, a single nonconformist can persuade majority members to dissent as well. Other scholars promote the dual process approach, which says minority groups and majority groups exert their social influence in different ways. Majorities elicit public conformity using normative influence. Their power and control matters most. Minorities, on the other hand, elicit private conformity using informational influence. Their consistency and commitment matters most. According to the dual process model, the effect of majority and minority influence depends on whether the judgment is subjective or objective. Majorities tend to have more of an influence than minorities when judgments are factual in nature, when there's only one correct answer to a question, for example. Minorities tend to be equally influential with opinion questions. We feel comfortable straying from popular opinion when there's not a clear right or wrong answer. The effect of social influence also depends on how and when conformity is measured. Majorities tend to be more influential when conformity is measured directly and publicly, whereas minorities tend to be more influential when conformity is measured indirectly and privately. Culture is yet another social factor that puts pressure on us to conform. As you know, cultures differ in their social norms, and people differ in the extent to which they adhere to them. Generally speaking, conformity rates tend to be higher in collectivistic cultures than in individualistic cultures. Dissent is more likely, though, when the culture is highly complex, when it's highly affluent, or when its diversity is high. Recall that conformity is just one form of yielding to social influence. In the next set of slides, you'll learn about the concept of compliance, which is a response to a stronger form of social influence.